Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good time of day wherever you are, and welcome to the very first episode of Football is Played with the Head, a podcast episode where two brothers, me, Fadhili and
Faniki Deche.
just talk about philosophy, football, and the philosophy of football. This is our very first episode. I think we're gonna talk about firstly. Well, one of the reasons as to why we're even starting this, I am a recently graduated philosophy, development studies and philosophy student in Kenya, at university in Kenya. Faniki is a current student of politics and what are you studying again?
Politics and international relations with them with.
Well, listen, whatever, you're studying something related to that. Anyway, the basic gist of this podcast going forward and in this episode is that we are both football. I think it's safe to call us football nerds. Yes.
Yeah, we are really football nerds. I watch all the games for fun, and that's why with the whole Hendrik chat about him liking Suburban Charlton's kind of dumb because that's exactly what I was when I was a kid. So we're football nerds.
We're both football nerds. I am a bit of a philosophy nerd, if I can say so myself, and there are some interesting philosophical conversations regarding the world of football, and the interesting conversations that philosophers have had regarding sport. So our goal today, and for the rest of our podcast for as long as it happens, is for us to bring you some of the interesting conversations, philosophical conversations, let's say, that pertain to football. And what is our first episode titled today? So we're going to be dealing with the question, or we have dealt with the question, of whether or not Kaoru Mitoma knows how to dribble. And what have we spoken about that, Faniki?
Well, just about who the player was, where he came to prominence. We all know about this. Is his time at uni, which is very fitting for two you graduated uni students that play football as well. We looked into his actual dissertation from what we could find and what makes a dribbler special. Then we went to the key meat about it, was the debate between reason and tuition, and how much those two trains of thought and ways of knowing comes to make a good dribbler good. Is it because they know how to do it, or is it because purely based off instincts and the interplay between the two of them? And then we ended with some basic Premier League predictions and who I think would be a dribbler for you to watch this coming season.
Yes, indeed. We talked about some interesting philosophical ideas about the various ways in which we know things, a difference between knowing how and knowing that, and the ways in which knowledge is a really embodied phenomenon in the world of sports. And we briefly discussed about whether or not we could get robots to be able to play football and dribble the way Kaoru Mitoma does. So with all that, we hope that you're going to be able to enjoy this podcast. Quick revelation about how we do things here. We make these recordings at the end of the podcast. That's why we're saying it in past tense. But don't tell anyone else that's how we do it. Without further ado, here is us two discussing whether or not Kaoru Mitoma knows how to dribble. Enjoy. So Faniki, tell me a little bit about Kaoru Mitoma from what you've gathered from him.
So I find Kaoru Mitoma very interesting, especially heading in to the season, is that he has kind of, if you asked me this a few years ago, not a few years, literally last year, this guy would be the talk of the town because he was the dribbling guy that came from uni. And that also resonates with me right now as I am in uni and stuff. So he's the guy who wrote a very interesting thesis about what makes a good dribbler a dribbler, really. Yeah. And he came up from uni to the biggest team, to the J League. Then after that, he was signed by Brighton, and he was absolutely rocking up the Premier League. And coming into this new season, 24-25, by the way, we're recording this thing hours before the season begins. He has kind of been a bit of a forgotten figure because He had a back injury last season that ruled him out for a huge chunk of it. But he's now coming back in. He's fit again. And okay, I play FPL, but like he hasn't been picked up mainly in many people's squads. And I think he's going to be one of those ones where like he might have a pretty big season ahead of him. So yeah, that's what I think about Kaoru Mitoma.
Yeah, that's all well and good. And part of the reason as to why we've chosen him for this first episode of ours is to do with the fact that, well, he is famous for being one of Brighton's, like let's say, secret uncovered gems that not other people were able to get. But he is also quite famous for having been this guy who wrote a thesis on dribbling. And from what I'd gathered, I was not able to find any sorts of copies of his actual dissertation, or even like let alone even a translation of that. But there was one specific screenshot I remember getting from a Twitter user named Eric Njiru that purported to be the abstract of his an English translation of the abstract of his piece called, and the title of his piece is Research on Information Processing of the Attacking Side in 1v1 Football Simulations. So it is quite, from at least, again, this is just the abstract, and to be honest, we're not 100% sure, verifiably so, that this is even genuinely is, but it does reflect the sort of the sort of thinking mind that goes to looking at the sort of underlying mechanics and decision-making skills that are inherent into considerations of dribbling. But given that the sort of title of this episode is kind of like, well, does Kaoru Mitoma know how to dribble? And the question basically here is sort of like, well, Kaoru Mitoma is all well and good. Yes, he is a very good dribbler in real life, and he knows how to dribble. But does the fact that he made a thesis about his dribbling ability, does that really influence his capacity to actually dribble? So with that in mind, what have you? I'd seen you'd gathered some stuff regarding like the some statistics about like the best dribblers in Europe's top 5 leagues over the past season, I think, or how long ago was it?
Oh yeah, it was basically for the past season. Mm-hmm. There is this lovely chart that eventually, when we get hopefully go to video and actually show it. But it was this diagram made to show on the x-axis is the successful dribbles per 90, and on the y-axis was the dribble success rate, and it's basically like a scattergun diagram.
Was it made
so
by
basically
FBREF, or?
Yeah, the stats come from FBREF, and basically the whole gist about these stats, I think you guys, people who are interested in like football stats are knew about these ones, where it's like a scattergun one, and the more top right you are, so with successful dribbles per 90, and the success rate of it, the more top right you are, the better. And I want you to guess, Fadhili, who do you think the three best players were in terms of successful dribbles per 90 and their dribble success rate?
Okay, so
just guess the top three in the top 5 leagues.
Okay, so basically saying like this chart, measure like along the x-axis, it's number of successful dribbles per 90, and then the y-axis is what the percentage
dribble success rate percentage.
Dribble success rate. Okay, so out of all, so I'm guessing you're asking me this question because Mitoma doesn't feature amongst the top 5.
No, he does not. But
right, so,
for good reason, I think. But for good reason, I'll get to it more.
Okay, that's cool. So I'm trying to think. Musiala comes to mind.
Yes, that's one.
Oh, okay, nice. Who else is there?
Two, like the other, like now there's two left. One is pretty obvious. The other is, I'd say, is A tier obvious.
Doku.
One is like S tier obvious, and then the other is like A tier. Come on, he's the dribbly boy.
Yeah, Jeremy Doku. Yeah.
Yes.
And then the last one is, I don't know, Usman Dembele.
No, not really. Actually, where is Dembele on this list? But the other guy was Mohamed Kudus.
Oh yeah, actually that's true. Yeah, Mohamed Kudus is quite obvious. Yeah, okay.
Which is actually quite interesting because, like, but then Mitoma, from the chart, he is actually quite low. I'd say lower. If you were to draw a line of best fit, it's actually lower than it because he, from last season per 90, he seems like with this flow chart, he seems to average like 2.5
Yeah.
successful dribbles per 90,
Mm.
when Doku is almost averaging 5. Oh my God. But then when it comes to dribble success rate,
Mhm.
surprisingly so, it's less than 50%. So he's
That
around
is
the players
surprising. Oh,
of,
okay.
he seems to be operating around the players of Pedro Neto, Gabriel Jesus a bit is doing a bit better on the success rate. And also, interestingly enough, Kylian Mbappe is pretty much like in the middle of the pack. But anyway,
Yeah.
with the Mitoma thing, when it comes to looking at his stats, particularly with this player, it is a bit inaccurate to look at his 23-24 season stats, because that one was mainly injury blighted. But
Yeah.
even with them, he's still a very good, like he has been a very good dribbler. Because if you go to FBref,
Mhm.
the 23-24 Premier League stats,
Mhm.
his progressive carries per 90 is 7.33, which is the 96th percentile. And his successful take-ons is 2.38, 87th percentile. So still operating he's still operating at elite levels, but just because like the injury really like stunted him, and I don't he started his development, and there's a few gaps in there. But if you go back in time and look at how he was in the 22-23 Premier League season, that's when you get to that's when you get to the ridiculous stuff, because like his you can just see all of it is just greens. Like he's in the 96th percentile for carries, 90th percentile for successful take-ons, and 93rd percentile for the touches. So with Mitoma, it's one of those ones where I feel like this season is a pretty big one for him, because his status has kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
That's why he like kind of picks up. But yeah, that's the stats that I have for Kaoru Mitoma.
Okay. Okay, that's all well and good. So I think for me, like, there's a question that I had in mind when coming into this is, okay, so I'm going to be talking about specifically about this notion that's developed like for a long time within philosophy known as embodied knowledge. And so, okay, well, I'll basically say it this way. There's this very interesting distinction that a number of philosophers have made and discussed and developed. That's called, it's a distinction between practical knowledge or knowing how to do something versus theoretical or factual knowledge, which is like knowing that something is okay, such and such is the case. So, for instance, think of the difference between the sentence, I know that Daniel Arap Moi was the second president of Kenya, versus the statement, I know how to ride a bicycle. So the question is like, to what extent are those same, is that same verb to know used in the same sense in that sentence? Because actually focusing on the idea of riding a bicycle, if you are a person who produced like a thesis regarding the mechanics and the body coordination that's required to ride a bicycle, firstly, would that really help you to be able to ride a bicycle? And secondly, would having the best theoretical knowledge about what it takes to ride a bicycle really help you in riding said bicycle? So with the Kaoru Mitoma case, it's quite interesting in that particular case, because going back to that image of his abstract or the thesis statement, I remember looking through a lot of the Twitter comments over there. And of course, while they were praising the fact that this genuinely elite level dribbler is someone who's also capable of performing sort of reflection on his own capacities, there are some people who are saying, hey, this must actually have helped him to dribble well. And of course, taking into consideration the caveat of the fact that he was injured last season, while he's a very good dribbler, he isn't the best dribbler in the world. It isn't the sort of case that Jeremy Doku, Jamal Musiala, or our GOAT Lionel Messi, or one of the greatest dribblers of all time, would be capable of giving you a detailed account of let's say, the theoretical or factual knowledge about what it takes to be a good dribbler. And actually, on that particular note, we'll get into another related notion about this. Do you remember there's this very famous YouTube video/clip that was analyzing in detail Lionel Messi's, you remember that Athletic Club, that Copa del Rey final goal in 2015 against Athletic
Oh
Club?
yeah, the one that was impossible.
Yeah, okay, like it was very funny that it was called quote unquote impossible, but like part of the idea behind what's so thoroughly impressive about that particular moment of Lionel Messi's excellence, and part of what makes all feats of sporting excellence so amazing to behold is that they involve genuinely ridiculously small margins of error and immense body control and immense decision making skills that happen very quickly, that it's almost astounding to believe that it's possible to happen. And there's an interesting conversation to be had here because there are two things I think I point to consider. One, from a lot of the interviews I've heard from, especially Pep Guardiola, one of the things that he really emphasizes about Lionel Messi is his decision making skill, very rapidly, just in general, but also in terms of the dribbling. And then, secondly, from the discussion surrounding that quote unquote impossible goal video and a lot of other Lionel Messi things, there's this sort of how can I say, idea that what elite level athletes end up doing is as if like they have you've seen that meme of the guy with like mathematical equations flying across his face.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of this idea that a genius level athlete like Lionel Messi is sort of performing mathematical calculations and judging properly what he's going to do as if he's working them out in real time, but just rapidly, quickly. And there's a way in which I think that argument is just fundamentally correct. And I'm going to look at some of the papers I've seen that discuss that. But I would just want to know, okay, so we're not elite level dribblers by any sort of imagination. But I don't know, are you able to explain to me from your personal experience, how does it feel like when you are dribbling?
Yeah, that's actually a very good experience. Like, when it comes to, first of all, audience, we are like all right footballers, like bring the entire world and like pick one player. We'd probably be better than them. So we played so we have like a decent experience playing the game, and that's what makes us more like appreciative of all this messy stuff. So I play currently for my university football team, and when you mentioned the whole thing about what makes athletes really good is executing pieces of skill that have very low margins of error. Because even when I'm dribbling and like all of my teammates, you see these things on TV and you try to execute it, and like Messi is dribbling and one player is coming at him and he pokes it right through his legs.
Exactly.
Like that's the one where you realize that like it's literally impossible to do, and the way Messi does that like almost seamlessly is crazy. Because what tends to happen is that it just bounces off the player's legs and goes off for a throwing or something like that.
True.
And there was this other goal that he scored. I think, I'm not quite sure when, but like he nutmegged the guy's legs, and the legs were like as wide apart as the width of the ball, and the ball went exactly through, and then he dinked it over the keeper. And when it comes to the math going through the head of Lionel Messi, is that happening? The answer, I believe, is yes, because we're human beings, we're complex individuals. We are going through these processes of mathing the math as we are going to a subconscious level. But I think the difference is explaining it. Because when Messi is dribbling, and also when Messi is dribbling, he knows what he's doing. He knows that, okay, at this point in time, I will move my body here, he will go there, and I will go. But I think the difference between him and Kaoru Mitoma is, particularly with the whole thesis thing, is that he's able to actually articulate it and investigate it to a degree where other people can understand. And I think when you were discussing about this is what kind of, I think the question here is really what makes good players good coaches. Because if you are able to explain like why I am able to like go past this player in a way that makes sense to another player who is arguably less talented, then that's what makes them a better coach. Because if Lionel Messi could explain like properly, then I'm pretty sure he would, and then he'd probably be also one of the greatest managers of all time. But who knows if he can? And back to Kaoru Mitoma, who is the focus of this thing. The specific reason why he joined university instead of getting the pro contract is that he knew what his weaknesses were. And I think that is what his best strength is, really. He knows his areas of improvement and he works hard to get it and he does it. And I think possibly this entire dissertation of his on dribbling, maybe us just like educated guesses here, is an acknowledgement of him wanting to improve his game. He acknowledges his deficiencies and turning those deficiencies into strengths, or his strength as super strength. That's why he's going into the analytics of dribbling and finding the core fundamentals of it. When, let's just say, like, the naturally gifted people aren't really able to describe it, and then that's how he finds it. And like, it's also very intriguing when you look at if I was to get, I'm just going to get into the nitty gritty of what his dissertation really is. And I pretty much boiled it down to two key fundamentals when you're dribbling, which is also something I'm trying to implement now.
Okay.
First of all is your body positioning when you receive the pass initially. Because people tend to have, obviously it's natural. People tend to look at the ball first when the ball like lands on their foot. But what separates the dribblers, like the elite dribblers, from just like the normal ones, is that when the ball's received to them, especially when he was doing, the way he measured it was by having a GoPro and dividing it into grids.
Yeah.
When the elite dribblers received the ball, and you could see on the grid in their eyesight, is that there was a significant portion of their opponents. So they already have their eyes on the opponent more so than they do on the actual ball itself. Because it's kind of, and from the way it is that literally by doing that initially, you have pretty much put yourself in a proactive, stance from the get-go. And the second thing that he does is that you pretty much attack the player before you attack the space. Because fundamentally, defenders are coached to show you into space. Because if, like with their body positioning, it's either they're showing you in or you're showing you out. They want you to take that space and then they'll deal with you from there. But if you attack the player, you essentially kind of put them in a position where they have to decide where they go. And then when they go one side, you go the other side. And I looked at the compilation of Mitoma's. There's this compilation that Brighton Hove Albion like released on their official YouTube page of his skills last season. Guess how many step overs he like had in the entire video?
I'm pretty sure 0.
No, it's actually 2. But
okay,
two. Yes. And his like what he normally does, like pretty much, if I say his signature move is show a defender one way, then Cruyff turn and then go the other way. And then the defender is absolutely gone. Or like a shimmy of the body shake. And in the game last season that Brighton had against Man City away from home, he had Kyle Walker on the ropes.
Yeah.
Like seriously. And we know that Kyle Walker is the guy who is the defender that's known for his pace. So if you hit it into space and challenge him in a full race, you're not gonna win. But if you put him off balance and then you get the yard off him and you're already ahead. So it's just one of those core fundamentals. I think what makes Mitoma different, makes Mitoma different really is that the ability to explain the rapid, quick decision makings. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so, well, I guess I will say, like, from what I've said, there is a sort of legitimate debate about to what extent the sort of know-how that's necessary to execute physical activities is similar to the knowing that I guess is required to be able to, let's say, like, explain procedurally and in propositional form the dynamics of dribbling. But again, I will just say, like, part of me considers the fact that it's not as though it's one of those things where I guess, like, it's just a gut feeling from this moment in time, but I'm not entirely sure that how can I say this? Okay, let me just try and put it this way. From a number of papers I've seen, in particular from an interesting, there have been a couple of papers from this interesting guy called Arturo Leiva, who's written a bit of stuff regarding embodied knowledge. And so embodied knowledge is just the sort of stuff that I talked about with regards to the bicycle example, the basic know-how of how to configure your body in ways of that enable you to be able to do particular things, physical activities, regardless of whether or not it's dribbling in basketball, doing gymnastic performances and the like. And so part of what he's suggesting here is that the way in which our brains form what we typically regard as muscle memory, they don't take the sort of propositional form that you'd have in any other types of knowing that statements. So it seems to me that when Kaoru Mitoma writes that sort of dissertation, it's sort of stepping back completely from his activity and performing a knowledge-based activity that isn't the same as a sort of knowing how to do things that was taking part in his dribbling there. So yes, I do agree with you that like there is that is Mitoma's different capacity compared to other not midfielders, other dribbling boys, other dribblers. But it does seem to be the case that I don't know, like it doesn't seem to me as though like him knowing like having all this technical knowledge about what underlies dribbling is something that necessarily leads to definitive outcomes in terms of improving in dribbling. I don't know, yeah, because like I guess my question would be to put the ramble short. Do you think Jeremy Doku's dribbling would be improved by reading Kaoru Mitoma's research?
That's one interesting thing that you've raised up, and the answer that I have to that is probably not, and that's because he's already doing it. When you look into Mitoma's look at the abstract and analyze his dribbling from it, and look at the videos that cover his abstract, and then you try and compare that to other footballers, particularly the footballers that are seen as like mono dribblers, if you know what I mean. Like they only just do one skill, and then that seems to beat them, because that is exactly what they are pretty much following the guidelines of the Mitoma argument. So I kind of see like this whole Mitoma dissertation that he has could be an example of, is math discovered or is it or is it made up or something? Is it discovered or is it made up? Because like what I think is essentially doing is like trying to find what the golden rule of dribbling is. And then that golden rule is kind of what explains all the good dribblers. Because you look at Jeremy Doku.
Yeah.
Whenever he is isolated 1v1 with a fullback, it's always, if you actually go through like a compilation of his, which you should do if you don't have a life, you realize that he always goes to the defender, and then the defender makes a move, and then he goes into space. And you'd think, and actually I believe that the whole stereotype of him just doing that skill with his right foot is a bit misleading, because it creates a perception of him always cutting inside, but he is the type of winger that can go either way. So he can, if the defender like gives the body position that he is going to follow him inside, he can also just cut it out and then go straight to the bar line and be the classic winger, rather than him just constantly trying to get inside. A player that we all know that is a fantastic dribbler, and he is literally not for one move, is Iron Robin. And even then, you can see him adapting the few fundamentals of the argument of being better at dribbling, is that he goes for the man, like he receives the ball, body upright, and he goes for the man, waits for the man to react, and then he cuts in and finds the back of the net. And another interesting, this is away from the Mitoma thing. I found another interesting video about it that kind of expounds on it more, and is focusing on targeting the defender's front foot as a mechanism for dribblers to use to like focus on going to them rather than going into space. Because if you go into space, then like you're pretty much playing into the defender's trap. But from targeting the front foot, which is kind of like an expansion of like Mitoma saying of going for the player, waiting for the player to react, and then you go in. It's that's the way that the likes of Robin and Doku have gone. And even when I've looked deep into further deeper research on the likes of Maradona and Messi, pretty much the big dribblers, it's also pretty much just been the same where they react after the defenders have made the decision. And one goal that literally just screams that so loudly is the goal of the century.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty much like every single player is off balance. Every single English defender is off balance, and they're kind of giving like you can see. I remember watching a very some English centric thing about the solo goal and why Maradona wasn't just like hacked down, because it looks like the defenders are giving a very lazy, in quotes, tackle of it, attempt to tackle Maradona. But it's just that he has committed them one side and then gone the other way and has left them off balance, and that's what it makes it look like the tackles that they made up not good enough. And you can see this across the board. This is what all dribblers do. They pretty much commit to the player. The player is forced to decide. They decide and then they go. And what makes the good players from the great ones is making that quick, instant decision. And Musiala is the best at doing that. His feet are so fast. He probably has the fastest feet coordination in the entire world. Because the way he managed to just slaloms through defenders is perhaps that's taken to the extreme. So I think, like, long story short, it's just that this is an attempt to explain the rule that kind of encompasses all the great dribblers. And that's what I think it is.
Okay, now before I continue, maybe I'll just summarize something and I'll ask you this question in this regard. Do you think Mitoma is explaining the basis of what goes on after the fact, or is he explaining the thought processes that happen in real time in the players' minds when they're dribbling?
I think it will definitely be the latter, because obviously these players are seasoned pros and they've repeated these actions time and time again. So whether it is consciously or subconsciously, you go to that point in time. It's kind of
now
when you've done something over and over again.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and here's the reason. Like that notion of having repeated those ideas over and over again, to the extent they're second nature, is part of the insights that have taken place with regards to embodied knowledge. And maybe, sorry for cutting you short, but it leads to another very interesting suggestion here. That I'll basically ask this: you remember seeing these videos of robots playing football?
Yeah.
And how turgid and not very fluid they are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're not.
Yeah. So there's this very, very interesting paper that I came across, published in 2021, that was titled "Why Robots Can't Haka: Skill, Performance, and Embodied Knowledge in the Maori Haka." So they are basically dealing with this question of can we be able to teach robots to perform the sorts of complex movements that are intrinsic to, to a lot of the movements that we're able to perform quite easily. And part of the interesting aspect about what embodied knowledge serves to illustrate or tackle is the very sort of, idea that knowledge is a purely in the brain or in the mind activity that has really influenced a lot of people within Western culture and our culture at large. And of course, that has influenced philosophy, Western philosophy, ever since Descartes, the idea that there is a mind divorced from the world that just knows stuff about the world. Whereas embodied knowledge seems to emphasize the fact that human beings, we are embedded in our environment and we learn stuff and we learn and come to know things not just with our minds or brains, but with our bodies. And it's this idea that and with this discussion about whether or not a robot can perform movements such as the haka, has to do with the questions of like, well, to what extent are these sorts of movements contained within a certain intangible cultural heritage that that is based on repeated repetition, that you can't just program immediately into the mind of a robot, for the same reason that you can't necessarily expect, probably even hypothetically, to be able to program Lionel Messi's know-how of how to be able to dribble into your mind and then come out with the master of being able to dribble. It's sort of the idea basically is, as you said, these are sort of things that you learn and only quote unquote know by being able to enact these repetitive, repeatable ideas over and over again, to the extent that like your body sort of like knows it. So I think that's sort of one of the reasons why I would side against the idea that like that these players, when they're dribbling, are sort of like mapping out in real time. I think that they could put down in an academic paper. Yeah. So like, what do you make of that?
I think that this is a fundamental discussion about the ways of knowing. By the way, we did, for anyone who studied IB, theory of knowledge, this is what it results in. Between reason and tuition, intuition, not tuition fees. I mean, intuition, where there is like the players skill, they know exactly what to do, and it's almost like an instinct to them. Then there's a part where you actually have to explain it, and I pretty much believe fundamentally that reason can pretty much cover everything. But the problem with it is that it's very hard to describe it because it overlaps with the other bits of humanity, if I was to get like really meta here. Because how can you explain how can you properly explain what's happening within milliseconds and why someone is able to execute them better than any other people? Because like with Messi, the difference between Messi and us when it comes to all the skills that he does is literally probably just like thousandths of a second and like maybe millimeters. Because this guy hits the ball in a certain place, in a certain angle, at a certain speed, at a certain time, that gets it beyond tight spaces and tight spaces, or like it goes through the slightest gap in someone's legs, and then he goes. So when it comes to this whole dribbling, process, I just believe that Mitoma, like the whole dissertation idea, is a description, is pretty much an attempt to describe what the players already do. And perhaps the limitation that I see with it is that it fundamentally focuses on dribbling in a 1v1 perspective. So not when you are in a tight space and you're slaloming through. That's why whenever I look into the dribbling compilations of someone, let's say like Jamal Musiala, I'm not really quite able to see that whether he's following these rules that has been brought up by this investigation, because he's going through tight spaces and he's just shimmying his way through, la croqueting his way constantly. And it's very hard for you to like think that this guy is within seconds looking at the player and like determining where they're going and then moving accordingly. So that's probably one big limitation that I find with it. And also something that we don't really notice with football is that it's a very chaotic sport. Like, this is not like your baseballs and your crickets where you just repeat one action pretty much over and over and over again. And for the guys who play football, they could attest to this. But whenever you're receiving the ball for a dribble, I highly doubt that there's one pass or one scenario that is the same. Each and every single time you get the ball, let's say on the touchline and you're 1v1, it's going to be a different case study that you're doing. I don't know, the ball might be bobbling, the ball is perfect. You take a good touch. You don't take a good touch. The defender is 5 meters, 10 meters, whatever meters away from you. So it's always different. So fundamentally, I do believe that you can be able to explain this, but well, we can't be able to explain it in quotation marks. Whether we have the ability to actually do so is another thing and another thing entirely. So when you're in academics, you're like, yes, this investigation is good, but it has its limitations. And that's where I feel like the limitations is. And pretty much, long story short, Jamal Musiala is the issue.
Okay, so it's good that you brought up IB heritage and brought up the distinction between reason and intuition. First of all, shout out to our respective TOK teachers, Mrs. Godlesko on my part, Mr. Shokot on your part. And by the way, like, I didn't mention Mr. Shokot. Like, I'm pretty sure he's going to be, for those of you who don't know, we both did the IB system in Aga Khan Academy in Mombasa, and we're just making references to that. So I'm pretty sure if we're going to have any listeners for this first episode, it will be him. But the reason why I make reference to that is that, like, the difference between reason and intuition maps on to the idea of, like, theoretical versus practical knowledge. And more specifically regarding what you mentioned about how a lot of the times, especially people like Messi, report the fact that they just respond with what they feel is right. And it captures something that I've seen regarding embodied knowledge, the idea that some philosophers believe that as opposed to theoretical knowledge that is representational in nature, that is sort of representing something that is, let's say, probably out there in the world, or representing a proposition that you have in your mind, there's the idea that know-how, being able to know how to do a certain thing, is sort of non-representational in nature. It is a sort of thing that you do in response to what, quote unquote, feels right in the moment. And at least for me personally, upon reflection, I can't seem to attest to that, because the best moments where I've been able to, like, dribble in a way that is, I think, anything remotely closely resembling excellence is when I'm sort of responding to the situation intuitively and not trying to necessarily think too hard about it. And indeed, a lot of the times that different athletes report freezing on occasion is when the things that come naturally to them, where they're just feeling the moment, are replaced by a sort of situation where they're quote unquote overthinking it, where they're trying to, like, now, where, like, it formerly was just like a second nature sort of thing, they're having to now try and, in a sense, representationally capture what it is that they're supposed to do. Should my leg be here? Should my hand be there? Should I swing my body this way rather than just do it in the motion? So again, part of me thinks that in all those situations, like, even though you're sort of, like, knowing how to do it, you're able to do it to your best ability and most fluidly when you know how to do it without thinking about it, in a sense. So I think that's another reason as to why, that sort of contrast exists, and it's sort of important to that description.
Yeah, I get that, but yeah, with the point of the overthinking is probably the part that makes good footballers, really good footballers, is when you turn the reason into just intuition. And when, as Ronaldinho just said, Ronaldinho said, you don't practice till you get it right. You practice till you can't get it wrong. And that's pretty much what the progression is. My point is here, you can explain everything, so you can't give people rules on how to follow it. But then you'll follow it. But then the way you are going for it is everything can be put into a rule book, but that doesn't mean you have to follow. Like, everything can be put into a rule book, but for you to truly master it is for you to do it without even consciously thinking about the rule book.
Yeah.
So if you've mastered it to a point where it becomes a part of your lifestyle, that is what it is. That is what it is. Yeah, and that's where I think reason and intuition marry. Really, it's not a conflict between two. It's two of them interplaying. Reason is something that can explain what's happening X and Y, but at the end of the day, for you to truly master something, you would have to make that reasoning become your intuition.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I'm good. Well, I think that probably concludes things for now. This is even without exploring other ways of know-how. One of the most important ways that kept on coming up from my reading was especially in the realms of learning how to do music. So if there's anyone in our potential audience who has some experiences about the ways in which you learn the repetitive and the learning how to play musical instruments, the point where it becomes second nature, feel free to add to that. But I guess as we wrap this up to a close, as Faniki mentioned at the top of the recording, we are recording this a few hours and I think right now a few minutes before this recommencement of the Premier League season. So anyway, you can just leave it off with some final thoughts about what your expectations are for the season. So I guess what are you looking for, especially I guess dribbling wise and or your team expectation wise?
When it comes to what I think about the this Premier League season, let me just go through the obvious ones. I pray to God Arsenal win the league, please. United get like a FA Cup or something, and like don't be the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. But when it comes to dribblers, there is this one dribbler that I'm highly excited for, and I'm very intrigued to see how he's going to perform. And people actually say that, well, the Brighton fans, apparently from his pre-season performances, call him even better than Mitoma. And when I've looked at his dribbling, when I looked at his compilations, he seems pretty good. He impressed me more with his pressing rather than his actual 1v1 dribbling, but he's been pretty good. And that guy is Gambian Yankuba Minte. Yep, Brighton's record signing, Gambia's left winger, Yankuba Minte is the dribbler that I'm looking forward to. Well, right winger, he's left-footed right winger, because he was signed by Newcastle, sent on loan to Feyenoord last season, and he played in the Champions League. He played in all Champions League group stage matches. In the Eredivisie, he got like 11 goals, 6 assists from like 30 odd appearances. But in the Champions League, where people are like, where we really care about our stats, despite getting knocked out on the group stage and being in a group with the likes of the biggest team was Atletico Madrid, he had 5 successful take-ons per 90 and 5.5 progressive carries. That is the 99th and 89th percentile.
Okay, interesting, yeah.
And so, well, obviously, on a sidetrack, he's very good defensively. Even when I looked at his there's this cam of his, this Minte cam, where they focus specifically on him for Brighton's friendly against Villarreal. One of his standard attributes is like he's a very defensively sound winger. So like he averages like 4 tackles per 90, which is weird. But basically, in terms of dribbling, well set on it. He's pretty much like the left-footed version of Mitoma, really. Rarely does any step overs, goes to the man, waits for them to commit, then goes. Struggles a bit with when it comes to Musiala demanding kind of dribbles where he is in close space and has to wiggle his way through. But if you put him 1v1 on the wing, he takes on the fullback and he's successful most of the time. The issue is, will he get minutes in this Brighton team, particularly at the start of the season? Not quite sure. He has to fight it with Adingra and Solly March to earn his place, and he is only just 19, which is crazy. But long-term investment, this looks like one of those Brighton ones that comes out of nowhere. He'll be great. He's only like 5.5, 4.5 million FPL. So guys, sign him. You heard it here first. I got him in my team. He will definitely appreciate in value over the course of the season. So yeah, that's my dribbly boy, Yankuba Minte of Gambia.
All right, and hopefully he will benefit a lot from Mitoma talking to him about his thesis. Well, for me, it's not gonna be too elaborate regarding that. Obviously, in Arteta we trust, so 3rd time's the charm. We are going to win the league this season. I do not care whether or not this proves to be true. And then my only hope is that Lamine Yamal doesn't get run into the ground by Barca this season. So hopefully that turns out well for him. But anyway, thank you to everyone very much for listening to this very first episode of our podcast. Football is played with the head. We shall see you in 2 weeks' time from now with something altogether different. So, bye for now.
See ya.